In the last episode, we started to look at just how critical it is to use a good performance metric. Because if you get this wrong, it could jeopardize all that hard work that you've put into building your trading system in the first place. We also looked at the first 3 performance metrics that I'll be explaining. In this episode, we look at a further 3, and these happen to be my preferred choice of metrics. So stay tuned. As well as looking last time at why the choice of performance metric is so critical, we also looked at how it's important to match the position sizing methodology used in the backtest to the performance metric that you're using. Some performance metrics require a fixed size and some require a position size that scales with equity in the account. Again, get this wrong and your performance metric will be giving you misleading results. So after looking last time at the compound annual growth rate over the maximum drawdown, we now move on to a similar metric, but one that uses the mean or the average drawdown, and I consider this to be a far superior metric to the maximum drawdown version. So in terms of the reward element of the metric, this is identical. It's the compounded annual growth rate, so there's no difference there at all. And again, that's calculated as you can see here. Now, the bias that was introduced in relation to the frequency of drawdowns that were experienced is actually removed as part of this performance metric. So instead of looking at the maximum drawdown, what we look at here is the average drawdown over the entire length of the backtest. So when a system is making new highs, as you can see in the system here, the drawdown, of course, at any one of those points is 0 because it's making those new equity highs. But whenever the system starts to fall underwater, like in the drawdown that you can see here, this starts to contribute to the drawdown value. So if we look at the black equity curve first of all, while new highs are being made, then the value of the drawdown is 0 or close to 0 throughout this particular rise in the equity. Then as soon as the drawdown starts to take hold here, those numbers start to increase, so it'll be 1%, 2%, 3%, 4%, and so on and so on. And then as it comes out of that drawdown, until it gets to this same level here, this will of course decrease. So it will go 4, 3, 2, 1, and eventually as it starts to make new highs again, the drawdown will be close to 0. But if we look at the inputs into the calculation from the red equity curve, up until this point it will be very similar. But then for every drawdown from the previous maximum level, this will start to, again, contribute to a higher average drawdown figure until it eventually works its way out in terms of making new highs again. But because this suffers drawdown after drawdown after drawdown, what it means is that the average drawdown in this instance will be much higher than the black equity curve. And so here it allows us to distinguish between these two and select the one that we would actually want to trade, which is the equity curve in black. Now the calculation of the average drawdown here is really quite simple. All that you need to do is to store equity values at set intervals, and that might be every hour or every day depending on how long your backtest is, and store those drawdown values at that point in time in an array. And then at the end of the backtest, you can work your way through that array and work out what the drawdown was at any point in time and sum up all of those values and then find the average. And as I say, in terms of my own use of this metric, I found this to be far superior. So when you go in and you do actually study the underlying equity curves from each of the parameter values that you're testing, the average version of this metric tends to distinguish the equity curves much better than using just the maximum drawdown. Now, the position sizing methodology that you use when using either the maximum drawdown version or the average drawdown version is really important here. So let me show you why that is. Let's say we have an equity curve using a fixed position size methodology. So here, rather than an exponential growth, what we're likely to see is fairly linear rises with a similar magnitude of drawdown. Now, it's a similar level of magnitude from a monetary point of view, but in percentage terms, this is actually decreasing. So whereas this might here represent a drawdown of, say, 10%, that same level, because the equity is almost doubled, this now represents just 5% drawdown. And again, because the equity has increased again here, this might now represent just 2.5% drawdown. Now again, this is a real problem because what it means is that the drawdowns at the beginning of the backtest are the ones that are likely going to contribute more to the final calculation of the metric. And these towards the end of the backtest won't contribute as much, while in the maximum drawdown case they won't contribute at all. But even in the average drawdown case, they have much less of an influence on the eventual score. And so this metric is the absolute opposite of profit factor. So with profit factor, it's preferable to have a fixed lot size. Here what we need is to have a position size that scales in relation to equity. So this same system might give results like this. Where each rise has an exponential behaviour to it, but that's fine because compound annual growth rate expects that anyway. And in terms of those drawdowns in a monetary point of view, they're actually increasing. But in terms of percentage, they are actually staying fairly constant. And this means that the overall calculation of the value of these metrics is much more robust than using a fixed position size for your trades. So click here to go to part 10.2, where we'll be looking at two further performance metrics. The first of these will be the coefficient of correlation, and the second is the coefficient of determination.